the first thing you notice about Elena Vasquez is what she isn't. She isn't tall. She isn't loud. She isn't wearing the kind of uniform that parts airport crowds the way water parts around a stone. She's 5'4" in worn Chelsea boots, dark slim-cut jeans, and a navy blazer she's owned since she was 23 years old. Her black hair is pulled back in a bun that has nothing to do with aesthetics and everything to do with efficiency. There are blue-gray shadows under her eyes from a red-eye flight, and a week of briefings in basement rooms that didn't have windows. She is, by every visible measure, completely unremarkable. She is also, by every other measure that exists, one of the most decorated combat veterans alive in the United States of America. She is 28 years old, and she has already done things that most soldiers will never do in a full career. She has bled for this country on foreign soil. She has held dying men and made impossible decisions in 4-second windows. She has stood in the East Room of the White House while the President of the United States lifted a pale blue ribbon over her head, and she has cried, not from pride, but from loss. The medals pinned to her blazer are not costume jewelry. Sandra Mitchell doesn't know that yet. She will. Chicago O'Hare International Airport at 6 in the morning is its own particular kind of purgatory, the fluorescent limbo between where you've been and where you're going, populated by people whose faces have all taken on the same expression of hollow, caffeinated endurance. The terminal smells like pretzel salt and floor cleaner and the specific despair of a Cinnabon at dawn. Elena Vasquez walked through it like a woman moving through weather. Not avoiding it, not fighting it, just moving through. She'd landed from Reagan National 40 minutes ago on an American Airlines red-eye that had offered her 5 hours of fitful sleep in a window seat and a bag of pretzels she hadn't opened. Before that, 6 days in Washington, D.C., attending joint briefings that she was not at liberty to describe to anyone outside the rooms where they happened. Before that, 3 weeks in Okinawa consulting on a readiness assessment that had also not been particularly restful. Before that was a long list of things that didn't invite casual conversation. What she wanted, right now, with the focused clarity of a battlefield objective, was to get on a plane to San Diego, sleep for 14 hours, and wake up to the sound of her father making tamales in her kitchen. Beto Vasquez drove up from Oceanside every time she came home, regardless of the hour, regardless of his own schedule. He would be there when she landed. He always was. She stopped at a coffee kiosk and ordered a black coffee, which the barista handed her without asking her name or commenting on the medals pinned to her lapel. That was fine. That was ideal. Elena liked people who didn't comment on the medals. They were not decorations. They were not jewelry. They were not things she wore to impress anyone or signal anything. They were records. An accounting. The physical residue of things that had happened and could not be unhappened. She wore them because her father had worn his, every time he traveled in civilian clothes. You carry what you earned, he had told her when she was 12, watching him pin them to his jacket before a Veterans Day ceremony. Not for other people. For the people who aren't here to wear theirs. She was wearing them for Corporal Daniel Osei, who was 21 when he died in a building in northern Syria, and who had told her, for hours before, that he was thinking of proposing to his girlfriend when he got home. She was wearing them for Staff Sergeant Amara Diallo, who had been the funniest person Elena had ever met, and whose absence was a specific shape of silence that Elena carried in her chest every single day. She was wearing them for Lance Corporal Torres, who had been 19. She was not thinking about any of this as she walked toward Terminal 3's security checkpoint. She was thinking about coffee and sleep and whether her father would have guacamole ready. She was 28 years old and tired in a way that went all the way down, and she had a flight to catch. The medals on her blazer caught the terminal light as she moved. The pale blue 5-pointed star of the Medal of Honor on its pale blue silk ribbon, the purple and gold of 2 purple hearts, the dark cross of the Navy Cross, the silver and enamel cluster of a Presidential Unit citation. She had worn them so many times they had become part of the weight of the jacket, unremarkable to her, the way old scars are unremarkable to the body that carries them. She got in line at Checkpoint 3A. She did not look at the TSA agent working the primary screening lane. She was looking at her phone, reading a message from Lieutenant Colonel Priya Mehta. Your car's confirmed, General. Driver's name is Castillo. Welcome home, and composing a reply that said simply, thanks Priya. Get some sleep. She did not see Sandra Mitchell looking at her. But Sandra Mitchell had already decided something. Sandra Mitchell had been a TSA senior agent for 11 years, which was, she knew, without anyone having to tell her, as far as she was going. She had taken the supervisory exam twice and scored well both times, and twice the promotion had gone to someone else, and she had stopped asking why. She arrived at work at 5:15 every morning, and she did her job with a thoroughness that she privately considered to be its own form of professionalism, even when, especially when, no one noticed. She noticed everything. She noticed the elderly man in lane 2 who was moving too slowly through the belt and made him wait, loudly, while she inspected his orthopedic boot with a thoroughness that was technically procedural and practically cruel. She noticed the young woman with the carry-on bag that was 2 inches over the size limit and flagged it, even as the woman explained in careful, hesitant English that it was her mother's medication. She noticed the businessman who rolled his eyes when she asked him to remove his laptop and held him at secondary screening for 6 minutes longer than necessary, just so he'd know. Authority is made of moments. You had to keep asserting it, or it dissolved. Then Elena Vasquez stepped to the front of the lane, and Sandra Mitchell looked at her and thought, oh, this one. She saw, young, mid-20s, pretty in a quiet way, dark hair, navy blazer. She saw a handful of medals pinned to the blazer's lapel, catching the overhead lights, clearly the kind of thing you ordered online for a costume or a theme party. She saw dog tags around the woman's neck, also available on Amazon. You could get them personalized. Sandra had seen them on teenagers at Halloween. She saw someone who was, in her professional estimation, probably cosplaying a military person. She had seen it before. What she did not see, the specific pale blue of a Congressional Medal of Honor ribbon, which is a color that does not exist on costumes because it cannot be reproduced commercially. What she did not see, the precise regulation pinning of decorations that takes most officers years to master, each medal perfectly spaced at 1/8 of an inch, every clasp at the exact same angle. What she did not see, the quiet, absolute stillness of a person who has been shot twice and survived worse than this. Next, Sandra said. Elena stepped forward, placed her bag on the belt, and removed her boots. Old habit. She always removed her boots and set them in a gray bin. She placed her coffee beside them. What are those? Sandra said, gesturing toward the medals. Elena looked up. Her expression was neutral. Neutral in the way that a calm ocean surface is neutral. Everything was below it. Service medals, she said. Service medals, Sandra repeated, with a specific inflection that turned the phrase into a question and a joke at the same time. Yes. Whose service? Mine. Sandra made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. Not yet. She was still calibrating, probing for the particular frequency of response that would tell her how far she could go. Elena's non-reaction gave her no information, which she interpreted as permission. They real? She said. Yes. Because they look. Sandra tilted her head. The way someone does when they're about to say something they want to be able to claim was just an observation. They look like the kind of thing you'd find on eBay. Or Spirit Halloween. The 3 people in line behind Elena had stopped moving. One of them, a middle-aged man in a business suit, looked uncomfortable in the way people look when they witness something they aren't sure they're seeing. Elena looked at Sandra Mitchell with the expression of a woman who has been awake for 22 hours and is very certain about one thing. This is not worth her time. They're real, she said, and stepped toward the scanner. Hold on, Sandra said. I need to see some ID. That was normal. Elena reached into her blazer's inner pocket and withdrew her common access card. Her CAC, the military identification card that identifies her as an active duty member of the United States Armed Forces, that carries a chip encoded with her rank, her clearances, and her service record, that is issued exclusively by the Department of Defense and cannot be commercially reproduced. Sandra took it, looked at it, looked at Elena, looked back at it. This says General, she said. Yes. You're a general. Brigadier General, Elena said. Yes. Sandra held the card out between 2 fingers, the way you'd hold something you didn't want to touch. Honey, she said, with the warmth of a woman who uses the word honey as a weapon. You look like you're about 22. This card says you're a general. She paused for effect. In the Marines. In the Marine Corps, Elena said. Yes. Another pause. Then Sandra Mitchell made the decision that would define the next 6 months of her life, though she did not know that yet. She laughed. Not a small laugh. A full, theatrical, shoulders-shaking laugh, the kind designed for an audience. And she found one. Two of the agents behind the belt looked over, and one of them smiled in the way people smile when they're not sure what the joke is but don't want to be left out. Take off that fake medal, *TCH, Sanders said, still laughing, gesturing at Elena's lapel. You're holding up my line. The terminal did not go quiet. The terminal was too big and too loud for that. But in the immediate radius of checkpoint 3A, a very specific quality of attention shifted, the kind that happens when someone says something that everyone around them recognizes as wrong before they can articulate why. Elena Vasquez did not move. She stood with her boots in the gray bin and her coffee getting cold and her CAC card in Sandra Mitchell's fingers, and she looked at the agent with an expression that was not anger and not hurt and not anything that Sandra could categorize. It was something older and quieter than any of those things. She said nothing. Sandra stopped laughing. 15 feet away, in the regular screening lane, Diane Shin shifted her backpack straps and looked at her phone and then put her phone down and looked at the checkpoint. Diane was 24 years old, a second-year graduate student in international relations at the University of Chicago, and she was going home to her parents in Seattle for a long weekend. She was not a confrontational person. She had spent most of her adult life in environments that rewarded careful observation over decisive action, and her instinct in uncomfortable situations was usually to look down at her phone until the discomfort resolved itself. She did not look at her phone. She watched Sandra Mitchell say something else to the young woman in the navy blazer. She was too far away to hear exactly what, but she could read the body language, the angle of Sandra's chin, the gesture toward the medals. She watched the woman in the blazer stand absolutely still and say something back, brief, calm. Diane reached into her pocket and touched her phone without taking it out. Not yet, she thought. Not yet. Secondary screening at checkpoint 3A was a 12-foot square area separated from the main lane by a low partition, equipped with a table, 2 chairs, and the specific atmosphere of a space designed to make people feel that they have done something wrong. Elena sat in one of the chairs. She had sat in worse places. She had sat in a blown-out courtyard in Raqqa with 2 bullets in her left side and 11 of her Marines in the building behind her in a tactical situation that had no good options. And she had sat very still then, too, and thought about each option until she found the one that was least bad, and then she had moved. She had time. She breathed. She waited. Sandra stood across the table, and she had called her supervisor by radio, and now she was waiting for him too. And in the meantime, she was still talking. It was, Elena had come to understand in the first 2 minutes, important to Sandra that there be no silence. Silence was space, and in silence other things grew. Doubt, self-awareness, the recognition that you might be wrong. Sandra kept the silence filled. Your supervisor can verify this is a legitimate CAC, Elena said, the third time she said it. Still in the same tone she'd used the first time. It has an encrypted chip. It can be scanned. We don't have a scanner for military cards, Sandra said. The TSA has a direct line to the DoD for identity verification. I'm aware of our procedures. Are you aware, Elena said, that interfering with a Medal of Honor recipient's decoration is a federal offense? Sandra looked at the pale blue ribbon. She looked at Elena. That, she said, is not a Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor is awarded to, like, old guys in World War II. Elena regarded her calmly. It has been awarded to active duty service members in every conflict since World War II, she said. Including Afghanistan. Including Iraq. Including Syria. You're 22. I'm 28. You don't look. I know. The supervisor arrived. His name tag said K. Reeves, and he was 34 years old, and had the specific expression of a man who had arrived at a scene he was already regretting. He looked at Sandra. He looked at Elena. He looked at the CAC card on the table. What's the situation? He said. She claims this is a legitimate military ID, Sandra said, and that those, she gestured at the medals on Elena's blazer, are real service decorations. I have reason to believe they're counterfeit. What reason? Reeves said. Sandra looked at him. She doesn't look like a general. Reeves picked up the CAC card. He read it. Something happened to his face, a slight contraction of the muscles around his eyes, a tightening. He set the card down carefully. Ma'am, he said, addressing Elena, I apologize for. I don't want an apology, Sandra said. Kyle, this is clearly. Sandra. Reeves said her name quietly. That was all. Sandra stopped. But she looked at Elena, and Elena could see in her face the thing that was the most dangerous part of this situation. Sandra was not backing down because she'd realized she was wrong. She was backing down strategically, the way people do when they expect to re-engage in a moment. She was waiting for something that would give her the opening again. Elena understood this. She had dealt with this specific human configuration. The person who cannot accept that they are wrong because being wrong means the whole architecture of their authority collapses. On 2 different continents, in 2 different languages. You couldn't reason them out of it. You could only wait. Reeves was speaking to her now, asking questions, trying to de-escalate in the tentative way of a man who doesn't want to be responsible for anything. Elena answered impatiently. She showed him her federal identification. She showed him her travel orders, printed on official DoD letterhead with the specific security markings that could be verified with a single phone call. She explained, once more, calmly, what each medal was and what it represented. Reeves nodded at each thing she said. He was building toward letting her go. She could feel it. Sandra felt it too. I still want to verify the medals, Sandra said, interrupting Reeves mid-sentence. They can be removed and examined. Elena looked at her. No, she said. It's standard procedure too. Show me the procedure. Sandra paused. Show me the specific TSA standard operating procedure that authorizes you to demand the physical removal of service decorations from a uniformed or veteran traveler, Elena said. Her voice was still level. It had the quality of a statement that has been considered from all angles and found to be correct. I'll wait. Reeves was very still. There isn't one, Elena said, because there isn't one. What there is a federal statute, 18 U.S. Code Section 704, which establishes penalties for the unauthorized removal or interference with military decorations. And there is a specific provision, she said, for recipients of the Medal of Honor. In the secondary screening area, the silence had the texture of something that had been said and could not be taken back. Outside the partition, the line had not moved. Several travelers had stopped pretending to look at their phones. Among them, Diane Shun had her phone out now, screen tilted slightly downward, at the specific angle that minimizes the visibility of recording. She pressed record. In a building in northern Syria, in the fall of 2021, there was a moment in which Elena Vasquez had 6 seconds. She had been separated from her fire team by an IED strike that had put Corporal Osei through a wall and Sergeant Diallo in the kind of unconscious that doesn't wake up. She had 2 bullets in her left side. She knew because she'd put her hand there and counted the entry points. And she was behind a blown-out wall with 11 Marines who were alive because they had not yet been found. And she had a radio that worked in a window of 6 seconds in which the extraction corridor was open. She could have called for extraction then. That was the correct decision by every metric. She did not make the correct decision. She made the decision that got all 11 of her Marines out of that building, and that put 3 more bullets in her body by the time she reached the extraction point, and that she has never, not once, described as heroic. Only as the thing that had to be done in the window in which it could be done. The Medal of Honor citation describes these events in the specific, precise language of military commendation. It uses phrases like conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty and complete disregard for her own safety. It does not convey, it cannot convey, the specific weight of what it means to be the only one standing in a room where others have fallen. Elena Vasquez does not think about this during her daily life. She is thinking about it now, sitting in a plastic chair in a TSA secondary screening area, because the medals on her blazer are the only visible evidence of it, and someone is trying to tell her they are fake. Not for the first time, she thinks about Osei and what he would say about this situation. He would say something funny. He always said something funny. She misses him with a force that is, after 4 years, still occasionally surprising. She breathes. She waits. Sandra had made a decision. If Reeves wasn't going to act, she would. She had been a senior agent for 11 years. She had authority here, in this checkpoint, in this 12-foot room. She was not going to be lectured about federal statutes by a 28-year-old in a blazer. She reached across the table. Her hand moved toward the pale blue ribbon. I'm confiscating this pending verification of. Elena's hand closed around Sandra's wrist. Not hard. Not threatening. The grip was precise and complete and utterly calm. The way a door closing is calm. The way a lock engaging is calm. It communicated, without force, without anger, without a single escalating element, that the hand holding Sandra's wrist had been trained to do considerably more than this, and was choosing, very deliberately, not to. Sandra froze. Elena looked at her. The expression on Elena's face was the one that Diane would later describe in the video she posted at 7:43 a.m. The one that would be screenshotted and captioned and shared 2.3 million times in the following 24 hours with variations of the caption. This woman has seen things you will never understand. You don't want to do that, Elena said. Her voice was quiet. It was not a threat. It was the calmest, most certain sentence Sandra Mitchell had ever heard in her life, and it landed in her chest like a stone dropped into water. Sandra pulled her wrist back. Elena released it immediately. Reeves was standing against the partition wall looking like a man who had just witnessed something that had entirely escaped his authority to manage. Sandra reached for her radio. I'm calling airport security, she said. Her voice was slightly unsteady, but she would deny this later, to herself and to everyone else. Okay, Elena said, and sat back in the plastic chair, and waited. The thing about airports, Elena had long ago observed, was that they were unusually effective theaters of human behavior. Everyone in them was in transit, between places, between versions of themselves, and that particular vulnerability tended to strip away the social performances people normally maintained. You saw more truth in an airport than in most places, because people in airports were too tired to lie convincingly. This is what made what was happening in the secondary screening area so clarifying, she thought. Sandra Mitchell, stripped of everything except the small mechanism of her authority, was showing exactly what she was made of. And Kyle Reeves, who clearly had the rank and the information to stop this, was showing that he was made of something considerably less. She wasn't angry about it. She had long ago stopped expecting the world to be otherwise than it was. She was tired, and she wanted her coffee, which was getting cold in the gray bin on the conveyor belt, and she wanted to be on a plane. That was all. Outside the secondary screening area, the line had become a loose audience. People were no longer pretending to look at their phones. They were looking at the partition, at the visible portions of the scene behind it, the TSA agent, the supervisor, the young woman in the navy blazer who had not raised her voice once. Diane Chun had been recording for 4 minutes. She had captured Sandra's demand for the medals. She had captured Elena's measured, legally precise response about 18 U.S. Code Section 704. She had, although she would not realize it until later, when she reviewed the footage, captured the moment Sandra reached for the pale blue ribbon and the instantaneous, effortless way Elena's hand had stopped her, and the specific quality of the 3 words Elena said after. You don't want to do that. The phrase would become, in the days following, something of a cultural shorthand. A meme. A gif. A sentiment. But that was later. Right now it was just a sentence, still resonating in the secondary screening area, while Sandra spoke into her radio, and Reeves looked at his shoes. 3 minutes passed. Then the automatic doors at the far end of Terminal 3 slid open. Elena did not see him enter. She was facing the wrong direction, facing Sandra and the partition and the line of travelers beyond it. She was not looking at the terminal entrance. She did not need to see him. She heard him before she saw him, which is how she had always known when Admiral Thornton was in a room. First, the specific quality of quiet that spread outward from him like a stone dropped in still water, as the people immediately around him registered the 4 stars on each shoulder and adjusted themselves accordingly. Then footsteps, measured, unhurried, the walk of a man who has never in 40 years of service needed to hurry to establish his presence in a room. She heard that quality of quiet ripple outward from the far end of the terminal and move toward her. She thought, no? And then, of course, Admiral James Thornton had not been scheduled to come through O'Hare today. He had been scheduled to travel from Andrews Air Force Base to San Diego on a military transport, and the transport had developed a hydraulic issue at 0200, and his schedule had been rerouted through commercial aviation, which was how the Commandant of the United States Marine Corps found himself at the front of the VIP lane at Terminal 3 at 6:47 in the morning, with 2 aides and a rolling bag and the specific expression of a man who has accepted, with equanimity, that his plans have been changed by forces outside his control. Thornton was 58 years old. He had been in the Marine Corps for 38 years. He had deployed to 4 different combat theaters, commanded 2 different Marine Expeditionary Forces, and sat in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee 11 times. He was, by the frank assessment of everyone who had served under him and most who had served above him, one of the finest officers the United States Marine Corps had produced in a generation. He was moving toward the VIP screening lane when his peripheral vision caught something. It was a color. Specifically, the pale blue of a Medal of Honor ribbon, catching the terminal's overhead lighting from 30 feet away. Thornton stopped walking. In 38 years of service, he had known 9 Medal of Honor recipients. He knew their names, their citations, their faces, the specific deployments in which their actions had been documented. He had stood in the East Room of the White House for one of those ceremonies. He had been the commanding general who had written the nomination recommendation. He turned. His aide said something, "Sir?" And Thornton did not hear it. He changed direction. He was crossing the terminal floor, moving at the deliberate pace of someone who has never needed to run to be somewhere important, and the crowd around him adjusted without being asked, because 4 stars will always clear a path. He was 20 feet away when she turned slightly, and he saw her profile. Vasquez. The name arrived with absolute clarity, cutting through 38 years of names and faces the way important things always cut through noise. He had last seen Elena Vasquez 3 months ago at the Pentagon, in a conference room with bad lighting and worse coffee, where she had presented a readiness assessment with the precise, no-waste delivery that had characterized everything she'd done since the day she arrived at Paris Island at 18 years old with her father's dog tags in her pocket and a level of physical and mental endurance that had, famously, left her drill instructor with nothing further to say about the matter. He had promoted her to Brigadier General himself, 13 months ago, the youngest in Marine Corps history. The ceremony had been attended by her father, who had worn his own uniform ribbons and had cried during the reading of her service record in the way only a parent who has been genuinely frightened for their child can cry. Thornton reached the secondary screening area. Sandra Mitchell had noticed him. She had straightened, had manufactured her most professional expression, had begun to compose the greeting that a TSA senior agent would offer to a 4-star admiral. He looked through her as if she were made of glass. "General Vasquez," he said. The words landed in the checkpoint the way a flare lands in a dark field, sudden, bright, illuminating everything at once. Elena turned. For the first time in the hour since she had gotten in line, her expression changed. It was not relief. It was something more complicated than that, something that had gratitude and embarrassment and a particular kind of weariness all in the same breath. "Sir," she said, and stood up from the plastic chair. Thornton looked at her for one moment, taking in the secondary screening area, the table, the CAC card still lying on it, the medals, Sandra Mitchell's frozen expression, and then he looked at Sandra. "What is happening here?" he said. His voice was not raised. It never was. This was one of the things people said about Thornton, that he had never, in living memory, shouted at anyone who did not deserve it, and that when he used his quiet voice, it was more corrective than any volume could be. Sandra opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. There was a question of identification. "This officer's identification has been verified?" Thornton said, looking at Reeves. Reeves stepped forward immediately, as if the Admiral's direct attention had physically moved him. "Yes, sir. Her CAC card is consistent and—" "Then why?" Thornton said. "Is she standing in a secondary screening area?" Reeves said nothing. Thornton looked at Sandra. "Are you the agent responsible for this?" Sandra's professional mask was still in place, technically, but it had developed a crack that she could not locate and therefore could not repair. "I had reason to believe the decorations were." "Those decorations," Thornton said, with a precision that made the word decorations feel like a scalpel, "represent 3 combat deployments, 2 Purple Hearts, a Navy Cross, and the Congressional Medal of Honor, which was awarded to this officer by the President of the United States at a White House ceremony that I personally attended." He paused. "Are you familiar with the Medal of Honor Protection Act?" Sandra's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "It is a federal statute," Thornton said, "that establishes criminal penalties for interference with a Medal of Honor recipient's decoration, including attempted confiscation. I didn't confiscate anything. I was told you reached for it." The silence that followed was of a specific quality that everyone in the vicinity of Checkpoint 3A would remember for a long time afterward. It was the silence of a situation that has reached the end of its possible defenses. Kyle Reeves was already on his radio. The crowd outside the partition had grown. It was the natural gravity of airport drama. People who had been moving toward their gates had stopped, were standing at a distance that pretended to be coincidental, watching with the specific attention of people who sense they are witnessing something they will describe later. Among them, Diane Shin stood with her phone raised now, not concealed anymore, openly recording, because the four-star Admiral with the quiet voice had resolved any ambiguity about which side of this situation deserved documentation. She was crying a little, which she noticed with some surprise. She wasn't sure exactly when that had started. Thornton turned back to Elena. Something shifted in his bearing. Not less formal, but differently formal. The way a general's posture shifts when he is speaking to someone he respects rather than reprimanding someone who has failed. "General Vasquez," he said, "I apologize for what you were subjected to here." "It's all right, sir," Elena said. This was, the people watching her would later note, the most remarkable thing she had done all morning. The complete, immediate, reflexive generosity of it. Not performance. Not grace under pressure. Simply the response of someone who is genuinely not interested in nursing the wound. "It is not all right," Thornton said, firmly. "It is very specifically not all right." He turned to the gathering airport management team, two men in blue blazers who had arrived at the edge of the scene in the past 90 seconds, carrying the specific expression of people who have just realized their morning has taken a very serious turn. "I need to speak with someone in your Federal Security Director's office," he said. "Now." One of the men in blue blazers reached for his radio with the urgency of a man who wishes very much that he had gone into a different profession. The next 20 minutes were, Elena would tell her father that evening on the phone, the part she had been dreading most. Not the confrontation, she had been through worse than Sandra Mitchell on 4 continents. But this part. The accounting. The public unspooling of her record, piece by piece, in front of an audience of strangers who had not asked to know any of it. It was Thornton who did most of the talking, because once he started, he did not stop, and because he was the kind of person whose version of events had the quality of official record. He spoke for approximately 8 minutes, and he covered Elena's enlistment at 18, her early service record, consistently exceptional from day one, her 3 deployments, the specific action in Syria. Here he paused and looked directly at the blue ribbon, and something crossed his face that was close to the expression Elena had seen on her father's face at her promotion ceremony. Her receipt of the Medal of Honor, her subsequent officer's commission, her advancement through the ranks, her promotion to brigadier general. "The youngest person to hold that rank in Marine Corps history," Thornton said, "and the only active duty Medal of Honor recipient currently serving at the general officer level." He said all of this to the airport management officials, who were writing things down. He said it in the measured, factual tone of a man reciting a record. He was not performing. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Sandra Mitchell. He didn't need to. Sandra Mitchell was standing at the far end of the secondary screening area, and her face had gone through 7 distinct phases in the past 10 minutes, and she was currently at phase 7, which was the one that had no name because it was the specific expression of a person who has fully understood, for the first time, the scale of what they have done. Kyle Reeves was standing beside her, and he had the expression of a man doing rapid career calculations and arriving at no satisfying conclusions. The Federal Security Director arrived at minute 14. He was a heavy-set man named Charles Park who had clearly come in from somewhere else in the terminal and was slightly out of breath, and who looked at Admiral Thornton, at the 4 stars, at the badge, and immediately said, "Sir, I am deeply sorry for." "The apology should be directed to General Vasquez," Thornton said. Park turned to Elena. He apologized. Elena accepted it with a nod. Diane Shin's phone had 22% battery left, and she was not going to stop recording. She had captured all of it. She had captured Sandra's initial mockery, the pulling aside, the moment Sandra's hand had moved toward the pale blue ribbon and Elena's calm, immovable response. She had captured Thornton's arrival, his identification of Elena, the 8-minute accounting of Elena's record. She had captured Kyle Reeves's face throughout, which was its own kind of documentary. She was still recording when Elena spoke directly to Sandra for the first time since the Admiral had arrived. It had all been said. The record had been established. The airport management was in discussion with the Federal Security Director. Someone had called someone who had called someone else, and the administrative machinery that responds to incidents involving four-star generals and federal statutes and Medal of Honor Protection Act violations was now in motion, and it would proceed at its own pace and arrive at its own conclusions without Elena's participation. She picked up her CAC card from the table. She put it in her jacket pocket. She picked up her boots from the gray bin. She put them on. She looked at Sandra Mitchell. Sandra Mitchell was looking at the floor. She had been looking at the floor for approximately 3 minutes. Her face had the specific quality of someone who has stopped performing, not because they've won, but because there is no performance left to give. Elena studied her for a moment. She thought about what it would be appropriate to say. She thought about what she could say that would be the most cutting, the most precise, the most completely and thoroughly devastating. She had that arsenal. She had earned it, in this specific situation, for times over. She didn't use it. "I know you were having a bad morning," Elena said. Sandra looked up. This was not what she had expected. "I could see that from the line," Elena continued. "Before you got to me. The man with the boot, the woman with the medication." She paused. "I've had bad mornings. I've had bad mornings in places where the consequences were considerably more serious than this one." Sandra's mouth had opened slightly. "I'm not going to tell you that what you said to me didn't matter," Elena said. "It did. Not because of my rank or my record. Those are just administrative facts. But because there were 11 people who came home from Syria who might not have, and the only thing I was ever able to bring back for the 3 who didn't was the right to carry what they earned. And you tried to take that." Silence. "I don't know what's happening in your life," Elena said. "I don't know what made you the person who does this to people. But whatever it is," she paused, and the pause had weight. "It's not too late to be someone different." She looked at Sandra Mitchell for one more moment, not with contempt, not with triumph, but with the direct, unflinching attention of someone who sees you exactly as you are and has decided to tell you the truth about it. Then she picked up her coffee from the bin. It was cold. She drank it anyway. She nodded to Admiral Thornton. "Sir, thank you." "Your flight," he said. "I know." She almost smiled. "I'll make it." She walked out of the secondary screening area and through the checkpoint and down the terminal concourse toward Gate 27, and the crowd parted for her, without knowing exactly why. The way crowds sometimes part for people who carry a certain quality of weight, and she walked through them and didn't look back. Diane Shin stopped recording at 7:43 a.m. She stood in the security line for another minute, staring at the secondary screening area, at Admiral Thornton still speaking to the airport management officials, at Sandra Mitchell still staring at the floor. Then she looked at her phone, at the 47 minutes of footage she had accumulated. She stood there for a long time. Then she posted it. The video reached 1 million views by noon. By the following morning, it had been viewed 14.7 million times, clipped and shared and captioned, and analyzed in 7 languages. The 3 words, "You don't want to do that," trended globally on multiple platforms for 36 hours. Cable news ran the footage on a 7-hour loop. Every veterans organization in the country issued a statement. The Medal of Honor Society issued a statement. The Marine Corps issued a statement. The White House press secretary was asked about it at the daily briefing and said the president had been informed. Sandra Mitchell's employment was suspended pending investigation on the afternoon of the incident. The investigation revealed that this was the 4th formal complaint filed against her in 18 months for similar conduct toward travelers, 3 of them minorities, 2 of them veterans, that had been inadequately addressed by TSA management. The federal security director resigned. Kyle Reeves was reassigned to a non-supervisory role. The Medal of Honor Protection Act provision violation was referred to the Department of Justice. The outcome of that referral is a matter of public record. Captain Marcus Webb, the airport security officer who had been standing near the checkpoint during the incident and had done nothing, filed a voluntary statement with the investigation, describing his own inaction as a failure of duty, and requested a formal reprimand be added to his file. It was. Diane Shin graduated from the University of Chicago in May. She went to work for a human rights documentation organization in Geneva. She still has the 47-minute video, unedited, saved to 3 separate drives. A letter appeared online 6 days after the incident. It had been written privately, on Elena Vasquez's personal email, sent to a friend who had forwarded it without permission to someone who had posted it without permission, and by the time Elena was informed of its existence it had been read approximately 9 million times. She did not try to take it down. The letter did not discuss the checkpoint. It did not discuss Sandra Mitchell or Admiral Thornton or the Medal of Honor or the national conversation that the video had ignited. It discussed her father. It discussed the specific image, which she had carried for 20 years, and which remained the most vivid and important image of her life, of Roberto Beto Vasquez, retired First Sergeant, United States Army, standing at her promotion ceremony in his dress blues with his own service ribbons on his chest, crying in the way she had never seen him cry before. Not from pride. She had written that clearly. Not from pride. Exactly, though pride was part of it. From relief. From the specific, bone-deep relief of a parent who had spent 8 years holding their breath every time the phone rang, believing that one day it would be a call they couldn't survive receiving, and who had lived to be on the wrong side of that fear. He taught me what it means to carry what you've earned, she wrote. Not for yourself. For the people who can't carry it anymore. I wore those medals for Daniel and Amara and Torres, and I would have worn them in silence in that checkpoint for the rest of the morning, because that's what the silence costs, and the silence is worth paying. But if there's anything I want anyone to take from what happened in that airport, it's not the part about me. It's the part about the 3 people who didn't come home. Say their names. Corporal Daniel Osei. Staff Sergeant Amara Diallo. Lance Corporal Diego Torres. That's all. That's the whole thing. Elena Vasquez landed in San Diego at 11:42 a.m. Pacific Time on a Tuesday. She had slept for 3 hours and 40 minutes on the plane, which was, by her recent standards, extravagant. She had her shoes off and her window shade up, and she had watched the sunrise above Lake Michigan for a long time before she closed her eyes, thinking about nothing in particular, letting the particular silence of altitude do what altitude does. She was not thinking about Sandra Mitchell. She was not thinking about the video, which she had been told about but not yet seen, or the letter, which she had been told about and had decided not to see until later, or the national conversation, or the congressional inquiry, or the 37 calls she would need to return when she landed. She was thinking about tamales. Specifically, the green chili pork tamales her father made with the dried corn husks he got from a specific vendor at the Oceanside Farmers Market, following a recipe that had come from his grandmother in Jalisco and had not been written down and existed only in the specific muscle memory of his hands. He was waiting at arrivals when she came through the doors, which was not a surprise. He was wearing his Army service uniform, with his own ribbons on the chest and his dog tags around his neck, which was also not a surprise. He'd been wearing them to pick her up from every homecoming since her first deployment. He was 60 years old, and he had the bearing of a man who had spent 22 years being paid to stand correctly and had never stopped. He looked at her for a moment when she came through the doors, at the blazer, the medals, the specific tiredness of her face. He had seen her face after all 3 deployments and after the hospital in Germany and after the White House ceremony and after the promotion ceremony, and he knew all the registers of it. He opened his arms. She walked into them, and she was 28 years old and a brigadier general and a Medal of Honor recipient, and the youngest person to hold her rank in the history of the Marine Corps, and she was also someone's daughter, and those things were not in contradiction, and they never had been. Tamales, she said, into his shoulder. Green chili pork, he said. Since yesterday. They walked out into the San Diego sunshine together, and Elena Vasquez did not look back.